you agree with Bernie that felons should be able to vote?
I think that ought not to be an issue in a national campaign.
Okay.
All right. So I think that's a issue that should be controlled by the states within the states. I don't think people running for president should be weighing in on something like that at all. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is, let's say I'm giving advice to someone on the state level, and we said, do you think in the abstract felons should be able to vote? I would say violent felons, no. Others, yes, but not while in prison.
Okay.
So once there should be a way for someone who is imprisoned, when he gets out of prison, to get a clean slate again, unless his behavior was so outrageous that he shouldn't be out of prison at all.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So I would say my general rule of thumb is violent felons, no. And as far as the other felons go, I don't think there ought to be nearly as many of them.
Okay. My guess is your solution is in a different direction than many people think.
Correct. So right now in North America, we have about 2.3 million people are incarcerated.
Okay.
Right. That's 2 states of Idaho. Not only should these people in prison get to vote, they should have 4 senators.
Okay. Right.
There is just an ungodly number of people that we have locked up in dog kennels, and I think that something fundamentally and profoundly there's something fundamentally and profoundly broken about our system of law. I mean, 2.3 million people.
Right. So is it we're calling crimes things that shouldn't be crimes? Is it we're fixing crimes in the wrong way? Where would you think the fundamental problem is?
Most of there is confusion about sins and crimes. There is some of that. Okay. But I think mostly we don't deal with crimes that really are crimes in a biblical way. Right.
Okay.
So our whole criminal justice system is built on humanistic presuppositions. For kids, we call them reformatories, as though we can reform them.
Right.
What prisons actually are is grad studies for criminals.
It's penitentiaries.
Penitentiaries. Even the name, it's where you go to become penitent.
Right.
Right. It's like being sent off to the nunnery, in theory.
Yeah.
But penitentiaries are not penitentiaries at all. They are a mass, an industrialized sized way of herding and controlling and keeping millions of people under control. So, and this has to do with assumptions about the state can fix you, but the state can't. That your fundamental crime or sin was against the state, right? So the state has got to do whatever needs to be done, instead of the crime or the sin or whatever it was being against the victim, right? So I really think that penitentiaries, I think we ought to just call them jails or prisons. And I think that they should be basically used for 2 purposes. One would be to hold someone for trial. Okay, you realize in Moses' Israel there were no jails, right? There are no jails. The jails that we find in the Bible are pagan jails, and I think there's a reasonable case to be made for them if you lock up someone accused of murder.
Right.
And he's awaiting trial, and there's a risk of him jumping his bail. You hold him in if he's a flight risk, you hold him in jail until the trial. Yeah, that's one use of a prison, is holding someone until the trial. The second use of it would be basically enslavement with a purpose. Okay. We have the enslavement part now. There's no purpose. If the person is guilty of a violent rape or a murder or something like that, I think the solution should be execution. right? But if the person has been imprisoned because of fraud or some theft, and I think that he ought to be released as soon as he makes restitution plus 20%. Right?
Okay.
Not restitution to the state, but restitution to the victim of his crime.
Mm-hmm.
So some teenager steals somebody's car, takes it on a joyride, and wrecks the car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think he should be tried and sentenced to the price of the car plus 20%.
Okay.
Plus 20%. If he has no means of, if he's got a rich daddy, then his rich daddy pays for the car plus 20%, and he goes free.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If he doesn't have the means of paying for the car, then we put him in prison,
Mm-hmm.
which is a factory or a farm, and a third of what he earns goes to pay for his own upkeep. A third of what he earns goes home to his family, and a third of what he earns goes to the family of the victim.
Right.
As soon as the victim is paid off, he goes free. So his release date is up to him.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, when it comes to dealing with people like this, you've got dealing with criminals, you've got a certain limited number of options. You can execute a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You can flog the criminal. You can fine him. You can exile him, or you can imprison him.
Mm-hmm.
And our system currently is imprisonment with arbitrary dates,
Yeah.
right?
So when we send somebody to prison now, it's common for people to speak in terms of paying their debt to society.
Right.
And it's a perplexing idea that like this person's sitting in a cage, that somehow paying us all back in
Right.
some way, that in some way we're having things made even for us.
Right.
But you're saying that the debt is not to the society, the debt is to the victim, and
Right.
it's an actual, tangible, quantifiable.
And you could obliquely say there's a general debt to society because the car he stole, it could have been anybody's car.
Mm-hmm.
There's an analogy there. But what actually happens is someone steals a car, takes it on a joyride, wrecks the car, he's sent up to the big house, and then they raise my taxes to pay for his upkeep.
And nobody gets their car back.
And nobody gets the car back.
Yeah.
In what way is this paying anybody back for anything?
And it seems like there's a sentimentality that has shifted all of this, where out of sentimentality, we've moved away from biblical restitution and come up with the humanistic restitution, which is far crueler.
Oh yeah, it's crueler, and we can ignore the cruelty because it's out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
I just keep coming back to that 2.3 million.
Mm.
If you drive across the country, you're driving past from California to New York or something. You're driving across the country with some 1,700 prisons and 2.3 million people locked up in dog kennels, and you don't think that you are a cruel people because you can't see any of it. Okay. If you took something that we would all consider barbaric, like flogging,
Right.
okay, and let's say you had all the petty thieves and the people, 17 parking ticket, people wind up in jail, and you say, would you rather have 30 lashes or 30 more months?
Right.
Right? We would say the lashes are barbaric.
Mm-hmm.
The prisoners, no doubt, would vote the other way.
Right, because they'll end up being beaten and raped in prison anyways.
Right, correct. But this way, it can be over and done. So I'm not arguing for let's figure out how to bring back a Roman lash or anything like that. I'm just saying that
Sure.
we are far crueler than we think, and it's an out of sight, out of mind. And conservatives tend to be, well, he committed the crime, lock him up, throw away the key. I just don't think it's a biblical way of approaching it.
Okay.